Welcome to the Therapist Connect podcast. Dr. Peter Blundell interviews therapists about their work and experiences within the therapist community.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Therapist Connect podcast. My name's Dr. Peter Blundell, and today I'm interviewing Faisal Mahmood, who is an individual and group psychotherapist. He is also a lecturer at Newman University in Birmingham and teaches on their undergraduate and master's programs. He's also a group psychotherapist and has an interest and practice in Gestalt therapy.
Hi, Peter.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm okay.
I mean, the first question I've asked everybody this because I think lots of people could find it very interesting to kind of understand what motivated you to kind of become a therapist in the first place and kind of led you to this career.
Well, it's a long story, Peter. I think growing up, I think my father really wanted me to be some kind of a doctor, really, which is probably not surprising coming from an Asian background, and I had no interest. I had some very personal experience of being very close to someone who is with very severe mental health issues. I think she was diagnosed at that time with bipolar mood disorder, but quite with very severe symptoms. For me, I was quite young at that time, probably 17, 18, and had an experience of spending some time very closely with someone, and I became really interested in trying to understand what happens in mind and trying to understand what's really going on, how to make sense of somebody who feels so energetic one week and so low next week. But that was, and I at that point decided to do my undergraduate and I decided to do masters in psychology. I have to say, I think that was, I found that somewhat rather boring, too much stats and too much, it was very CBT focused, as most psychology degrees are. And did some work at that time in assisted some people in a shadow or assistant roles and, with some psychologists and stuff. Didn't really enjoy. And then decided that I need to do more. I attended some short courses at that point. This is talking about late 90s. Did something in person center, did something 101 TA at that time. And then at that point, I have to say, I must have read or something about Gestalt during my master's, just a word. And I didn't like it because I didn't know how to pronounce it, so I just left it. This is not for me. Mm-hmm. And TA and person-centered sounded more attractive because it was easy to at least pronounce. But I just ended up going to a Gestalt Institute in London, Gestalt Centre, and decided to do the 1 year. In those days, I think there used to be 1 year long certificate course. I think they're still running something similar. And I just absolutely fall in love with Gestalt at that point. Absolute. And this is my longest love for anything in my life, nearly 35 years.
What was it about Gestalt that appealed to you?
I was born in Saudi Arabia, and I lived many early years of my life there. And then I spent some time in Pakistan, and then I came here. Half of my family was here, but I wasn't here, so I came and joined my family. And something that I found about Gestalt, that it seemed I felt very natural. And the reason I mentioned about my history and being born there is a certain directness that I felt more comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And I make reference to the cultural backgrounds because there's certain attraction coming from those living in different parts of the world and growing up in different parts of the world. There's some attraction to that directness. Partly, I guess, partly because growing up in a country which wasn't the home country of your parents, so there is a so you kind of miss the subtext because I'm not Arab, and then living a few years in Pakistan, even if my parents originally were from Pakistan, I was always kind of seen or treated as a foreigner. So, and then again, trying to get my head around the subtext of even at basic linguistic level. So that has, and then coming and living here, which is a completely different culture. So there's something that attracted me that I perhaps don't need to worry too much about the subtext, because there was enough directness that I don't need to make sense of something which is not being said yet.
Okay.
And I really love the quote, that Gestalt is a therapy of obvious. So, and I love that attracted me. I don't need to understand two complexities of the cultural and linguistic backgrounds. So that's the attraction, and that attraction is still there.
That's really interesting. And I noticed as well that, so obviously you fell in love with Gestalt, but I noticed that you have trained in like a variety of other approaches as well, kind of like CBT and some other things that I noticed kind of on your profile. So do you still consider yourself a Gestalt therapist, or do you count yourself as integrative? What's your kind of therapeutic approach? How would you describe it?
That's an interesting question. I think I live kind of a double life. During my training, I started working in addiction services in my first placement, and much of the addiction counselling services, which are very heavily CBT based, motivational interviewing based, and those kind of, and I agree that sometimes that's probably very useful interventions to make. So then, about nearly 10 years, I predominantly worked incorporating CBT as a kind of the kind of very figural intervention styles. So I kind of sit somewhere more comfortably that I am a Gestalt therapist at the core. That's what defines my core as a therapist, and I also incorporate some concepts from other modalities. So I think the best way to describe is a Gestalt-based integrative therapist.
Yeah. Okay. And so it's interesting. So you did some work in addiction services. So can you tell us a little bit about the rest of your career? Like, kind of, where did you kind of move on from there?
Placement from addiction, and ended up actually getting a job in addiction services as a counsellor. And this was in London. I used to live in London, and then maybe about, wow, how long it is now, I can't remember, 2005, whatever, how long that is, moved to Birmingham, and then continued to work in addiction services. I was working as a hospital counsellor at that time. So in terms of job-wise, I've worked about nearly 10 years in addiction services. But alongside, I was doing some teaching or training alongside my main job, mainly as a visiting lecturer or part-time tutor. Started teaching in London, one of the colleges in East London, and then moved here, started Birmingham University, and then the whole program moved to Newman University. And about now 5 years ago, I left my addiction career completely. I moved to more management in the last 5 years of my work. I had a very few clients. I was mainly managing services, and I think I probably got bored of management work and moved to full-time working as a senior lecturer. So for the last 5 years, I'm working full-time at Newman as a senior lecturer in counselling and psychotherapy. And I had now postgraduate program masters in counselling and psychotherapy.
Fantastic.
But alongside, had my private practice. I have still a small private practice in Solihull where I live. So some clients and some supervisees.
How do you find then, because I've had this transition over the last couple of years of moving into teaching, counselling and psychotherapy. How does that fare next to being a practicing therapist then? Do you find like it's a good combination to do the two alongside each other?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential, really. I really don't think you can really be in a role of a trainer in this profession unless you are you're in your clinical practice. It's fine if people want to decide to take some break, but in essence, by default, I think it greatly supports at two different levels. It greatly supports both my clinical practice because I'm reading more. I'm constantly try to keep up with new material, and also it supports my teaching. Using my clinical experiences and expertise, and I think at personal level, I think it kind of keeps me interesting in what things I do, because I probably would get bored if I'm only doing one kind of a thing, Monday to Friday. Yeah. So having an element of teaching and practice also keeps me quite interesting in the profession. Yeah.
No, I can relate to that because I find the variety of kind of doing teaching and being in practice, it does keep me motivated, and it's a very interesting week. It's not just the normal 9 to 5, is it?
And if you enjoy teaching of this kind of a profession, it's as I know you do. It's a remarkable profession. I thoroughly enjoy working with my students. That's completely different relationship with human beings, and I really like that part.
Yeah. I also noticed on your profile that you also, I don't know whether you still do this now, but you have done some group work with Gestalt therapy as well. Is that something you still do now, or?
Oh yes, absolutely. That's my absolutely passionate, Peter, about groups. Groups are the best things ever, and if people haven't tried it, I strongly encourage you. It's absolutely great, and I'm so passionate about group work. I just to kind of quickly give background that I originally was trained in late 90s and late 90s and 2000. At that time, I did my diploma in counselling in Gestalt, and then at that point I left, and I started working as a practitioner and all of this stuff. And then I decided to go back, and because I think I felt that there's something, I had a sense of yearning to learn more about Gestalt, and then went back and did postgraduate training and masters, and at that point I wasn't aware, I have to say, when I went back to Gestalt Center, that the postgraduate training included both individual psychotherapy and group psychotherapy. So we were trained both in individual and group, and they heavily worked in the group works. And I came from a background growing up as a young child, feeling a pathologically shy person. I would find it very difficult. I remember my early school days that I would standing up and speaking up in a group was absolutely impossible. So my early experiences of within the counselling settings, the group, and trying to figure that out, and I think I made a huge transition over the years, and then absolutely loved it. I find working with groups really deeply fulfilling. And I still do that. We did some training last year with a colleague in Sheffield, and we had a plan to do a couple of weekends in Birmingham, but because of the coronavirus situation, so we just paused everything. Partly groups, Peter. I think I have some concerns about that many people who many practitioners, counselors, psychotherapists, they kind of try to use their individual counselling skills or theory set to their group work if they engage with a group. Where I think when it comes to the individual counselling skills like listening and paraphrasing and those kind of open-ended questions, it's fine. You can of course use those skills in that context. But I think there is a bit of a lack of I would say training or lack of understanding about the group work is slightly different. You need to have a slightly different sets of conceptualizing. Yeah. The problem I have noticed that most people, they use hot seat model. What it is that they do some kind of one-to-one work in a group setting. So a leader or facilitator would engage with one person, and then other members, they are almost observers. They might give feedback. To some extent, that's fine, but that's I personally would see that as that should be lesser of the work in the group setting. See, I'm so passionate about groups. I haven't forgotten about your question, and I just started my speech about groups. Apologies.
No, that's okay. That's what I was asking about, because I was really interested in kind of what Gestalt group work involves, really, and how and what you enjoy with it. So I think you've given quite a good overview of that, really. So obviously, you do a lot of work with students. So one of my questions was going to be about any advice that you might be able to give to any students or trainees who might be listening to this about if they want to enter into the therapy profession. What advice would you be able to give somebody who was thinking about that next step in their career?
Oh, that's a difficult question, Peter. I mean, I would say a few things what I would like people to consider. One is that I think it's so important, I must start from this, that counselling or psychotherapy is not a mainstream profession in this country. And to be very honest, it's a sad thing to say, I don't see things changing for many years to come. So they need to consider before they decide that this is the profession, because this is not a mainstream profession like teaching or nursing or, and so it remains largely a part-time profession, even if that's very difficult and very competitive. It's mainly a profession where people rely on private practice, and that is itself a challenge. That doesn't suit everyone. That requires a lot of kind of additional things for people to worry about and think and consider the implications of that. So I think that's the one thing they need to think, that their motivation, that is why they want to be trained as a counsellor. The second thing is that sometimes I hear, well, more than sometimes, that people would say that, I think I'm a very good listener, and a lot of my family members or my friends, they always come and talk to me. I think this is brilliant. But then making that transition into becoming a professional counsellor or psychotherapist, they need to consider that's why then train to be a psychotherapist, because you're good at something. You may bake really good cakes, but you really want to then become a professional chef, for example. So consider those implications in some ways. Then the thing is, I think I strongly encourage that people, before they even apply for any professional trainings, if they can, and I would strongly encourage people to do this, to do some kind of an experience in some setting where they can, either in a sport worker role or some kind of support role, where they engage with other people in some kind of supportive role. So where people are in some kind of emotional distressing situation and they spend some time. Have a sense of that. How does it feel when people are sitting there and talking about their life problems? Do I jump into it quickly? And then have that embodied sense of that. And then once you have done those kind of things, then I think it's a brilliant. I mean, the thing is, you perhaps would agree with me on this, that counselling or psychotherapy is not just a profession as such. It almost becomes your way of living. Yeah. It's not something we just leave it when we enter when we leave the workplace or leave our therapy room. There's a huge part of that stays with you as a person. And I think that is a great attraction, that it's not just a professional journey, it's a personal journey. And I think if somebody is interested in that and they have thought through the implications, that the job market situation, and if they're still interested, I think I'll strongly encourage people to go and engage. Do your research, I would say, where they want. I go and visit the place meet up with, if they can, with 1 or 2 staff members, have a sense, have a feel.
I think that's really good advice, and I think what you're describing there is really thinking through and getting the information that you need before you take that step of before going on to the course and entering into that training, and checking that actually this is something that you do want to do as a career and that you are going to be passionate about, and you are willing, I suppose, to engage with the level of self-reflection as well that it takes to kind of do that training and kind of come out the other side, really. And I think I think any trainee would be good to take that advice on board, I think.
Thank you.
So what have been the rewards of your career so far, do you think? What are the things that you found most rewarding in the work that you've done? I suppose either as a therapist or as a lecturer as well, I suppose.
I start from as a therapist response to that. Peter, I have to say that there has been some moments and experiences working with clients over the years that I felt so deeply touched and so deeply moved, and that I don't think any other profession would have offered me that experience. Yeah. And so I think that's quite rewarding. You know. Teaching, I absolutely love that those moments of transitions where there are, you know, when I see the students or trainees, they're trying to grapple with something, and you trying to support them to make sense of something. And then the moment comes and the aha. And those kind of moments, they're really kind of rewarding. Yeah. And I think I have to say, really, those kind of moments are the moments that kind of keep me going in this profession, both as a therapist and as a trainer. And I think I probably would stop one or the other or both when I'll stop experiencing those aha moments.
Yeah, I know they're so important, aren't they? And they're, well, it's like you were saying before, so deeply impactful to us, as even though it's happening to somebody else, but being there alongside somebody whilst that's happening is a privilege, really. It is a privilege to be able to be there while that's happening, I think. So there's some of the rewards. What about some of the challenges that you've faced then in your career? What are some of the difficulties that maybe you've had?
I think the challenges in terms of the wider challenges as a trainer, because we are part of a university course, as you are too, Peter, there are certain challenges. The running a counselling and psychotherapy programs within higher education settings. You know, the counselling and psychotherapy programs largely in this country, they are not attractive programs for many institutes. Because they don't generate the similar kind of income. That's one challenge. The second challenge is that naturally the counselling and psychotherapy training doesn't fit the natural higher education settings in terms of modules, in terms of assessments and credits, and how do you quantify somebody really engaging in a PD group and somebody writing a really great piece of essay. You know, from when you try to quantify these things within the university structure, they might have the similar value, but we know at a qualitative level they're very different. I mean, I have to say that my experience is really where I am. You know, there's a greater level of flexibility because they were teachers training institutes, so they always had greater understanding of professional trainings. But at the same time, those challenges remain a challenge for the profession. And I have a concern. I have to say that I think unless counselling and psychotherapy courses are well supported by those bodies of BACP or UKCP or BPC or NCS, and if I missed any, but those bodies, unless they really support those courses, I think it will become more and more difficult for counselling and psychotherapy courses to survive and to stay within higher education sector. because I think because you are the level of scrutiny is, or level of accountability is on two sides. One from the higher education quality assurance point of view, and then from your accrediting body's point of view. So you're kind of trying to meet two very demanding set of requirements. So there has to be some kind of coordination between accrediting bodies and higher education institutes, so they can combine those processes together. And I hear that some of the other professions have managed to do that. Nursing, for example, the external accrediting bodies and institutes, they have agreed a common. I think counselling psychotherapy needs to do something similar. Otherwise, it's too demanding.
Yeah, and there's a lot of conflict there, isn't there, and a lot of kind of miscommunication where two different kind of systems kind of coming together. I think that's a really good point. One of the things that I don't know if when we spoke last time, I think you mentioned that you kind of wanted to talk about, and it was around the some of the myths or common myths or misunderstandings that some students might have when they're coming on a counselling and psychotherapy course. And I don't know if there was something that you kind of wanted to say about that.
I talk about this this issue. I think not necessarily trainees. I think I've seen very, very much even experienced people have the similar kind of views, and I think one of the classic one I see, because we offer integrative courses, so of course people talk about CBT, psychodynamic and humanistic concepts. What often I've seen that somebody would say that, I asked my client how they're feeling, so I did person-centered counselling. I asked them, tell me about their childhood or something. So I was doing psychodynamic counselling, and then I asked this question: so what would you like to change in your life? So I was doing some CBT, but there's this really, deep misconceptions about that anything about past has to do with psychodynamic approach. Anything you're asking about here and now, it must be Gestalt or person-centered, and anything about future is CBT. I think that's a really nonsense way of kind of understanding. I mean, all approaches, they can only function, and they do function in here and now. Even if you're psychodynamic or CBT or person-centered or Gestalt, that you can only do your work in the here and now. Even in classic counter-transference, even if you make links with the past, the work is happening in the therapy room. So all therapists, they can only function in the present moment. And all therapists are equally interested in the past experiences. They might have a slightly different lens to use, but person-centered therapists or Gestalt therapists would be equally interested in what happened. Either how did you internalize some external values, and so and so is CBT, the concept of core beliefs, and how did they develop, and often or learning principles. How did you learn growing up? So and all therapists ultimately trying to help clients to live more effectively in their future. So I think that's one of the kind of classic misconception that, psychodynamic past, person-centered, Gestalt present, CBT future. And I think partly because to some extent, I think it's a probably lack of understanding, lack of good quality training, combination of those kind of things, and not being challenged in perhaps in the supervision in some ways kind of develops or they constantly reconfirm those misconceptions. So that's the one classic one. I can't think of anything else. What might come up if we carry on?
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, I think that was kind of briefly what you were mentioning last time we spoke, and I know that you wanted to cover it, so I just thought I'd bring that up, and I think it's definitely a valid point. I think if moving on, and I think it would be kind of remiss of us if in this discussion if we didn't talk about this particular topic. Obviously, the recent death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, which as we're recording this, it's the kind of very predominant at this moment in time. I suppose I was really interested in your thoughts really about what you think the impact of that will be kind of on the therapist community.
Yeah, I mean, I'll perhaps start from my personal place where I am. I mean, I'm deeply, I kind of moved from the place of deeply angry and deeply sad and frightened. I kind of moved between these places. I mean, personally, as an Asian, Muslim therapist, something that is very close to me in my own experiences. We know the history, we know the situation around Islamophobia in the recent times, and of course within the context of the terrorism. There's something that lived experience. I mean, not lived experience just as a person, but as a father. Worrying about my own safety. So that's something very much something goes to the core of me as a person. I mean, it's extremely worrying situation, Peter. That it's interesting that I remember growing up reading or watching movies about Second World War and thinking that how on earth world allowed this one person or a group of people to kill 6 million Jewish. I mean, what was going on? How on earth one could do something like this? And thinking that this is perhaps something that used to happen in the past. But guess what? No, it's not. It's happening right this very moment. It's in a different form. And actually, I see a lot of similarities between 2020 and 1920. It's we almost repeating the cycle after 100 years, and who knows that there will be another world war of that kind with millions of people dying in that. The impact. Coming to the more specific discussion about the counselling and psychotherapy profession, I think partly I feel that I feel some reassurances. I feel reassured that there are some more voices than ever before. I would say, my experience, at least in my circle, that people are talking about these issues. The social media, people writing a paper or people doing blogs. That's more optimistic place to some extent, but largely. The problem is that it has become the whole discussion about diversity and issues of difference. It has over the years, as you know, pretty much a tokenistic concept that many courses they would add a tagline within their assignment or one PT group or one day in a year. We're going to talk about issues of diversity today. I mean, it's largely like that employees nowadays are expected to do manual handling training or health and safety training that, they're not interested, trainers not interested, they just have to do legally. So it's pretty much that kind of a thing. There is almost a lack of real commitment to engage in this because it's really, really difficult thing to engage with. The second problem that I see, which is much more broader problem, Peter, and I think that might be a bit challenging, what I'm going to say in some ways, because the part of the problem I see that most of counseling psychotherapy theories, they are, I mean, I'm not going to say something new here, people probably always use this in their essay writings and stuff. They're very kind of American or Western or European based philosophy. But what does it really mean when people say this? People often not engage in the follow-up of the discussion. One of the major difference is that most of these philosophies, theories, they're based on this idea of a client or a person as an individual. And I'm not talking about this discussion about that some societies are more collective societies and other societies are more person-based societies. I'm not talking about that division. I'm talking about fundamentally that we see an individual as a single entity. And that's a part of the problem. Because I fundamentally believe that you cannot really separate a person from person's surrounding, which we in Gestalt talk about as a concept of field theory. And that gives a complete different way of looking at issues of, for example, differences or racism. The reason I say this, because for many times over the years, I've worked with several therapists and supervisors and trainers, and most of them have been white, and people would say something to me like, well, what's this like for you to work with a white therapist? Now, that really bugs me, because it's such a complex discussion, and you make your client to take responsibility of such a complex, shitty discussion, and then that's because it's based on this individualistic concept, of dualistic concept that I am separate from you, or the world is separate from us and we, and all that kind of nonsense. The therapy, if you follow a therapy based on the concept of co-creation, as based in the field theory concept, then this issue is not just for the client. This is an issue that belongs to both the therapist and the client. If there is a white therapist and a black client, then the issue of difference doesn't belong to the client. The issues of difference belongs to both parties, and both parties must be willing to engage in this discussion. But what happens is that the therapists, they're not comfortable in that process to engage. Either they're not trained, or they're not supported, or they're too frightened. Because if only the client reversed the question, a black client reversed the question to white therapist saying, what is it like for you to work with a black client? I can imagine the therapist thinking, oh, are you thinking I'm racist? Do you think I'm prejudiced? Do you think, how should I respond to that? Should I say, oh, I celebrate working with clients from different backgrounds? How do I respond? And if you're okay for me to carry on a couple of more minutes.
Absolutely. Just on that point, I'm just thinking about how often maybe as therapists, there's a bit of a generalization, but we can become uncomfortable when the lens is no longer focused on the client, but actually focused back upon ourselves. But how important that is, that as you're talking about there, this co-creation, that actually it is always between us and the client. There is always that dual process going on, and how we need to be able to sit with that uncomfortableness and work out ourselves, well, what is going on there and what is that about?
Absolutely, Peter. And that's exactly what I think what's lacking, really. And I mean, every 6 months, I get really annoyed about something going on in the counselling and psychotherapy world, and it changes. What really annoys me at the moment in the counselling and psychotherapy world is that when I hear the word that people use so frequently, that this is my privileged position, and this is so much used. I have a problem with this, and some people might have objection with my problem. The reason I say this is because I think for a therapist to own this position, that I'm in a privileged position, sometimes people do this prematurely. They do it too quickly. They do it in a way that, well, I put my hands up, that this shows that I have, it almost removes them from that process of struggle and grappling and making sense of difference.
It's almost a throwaway comment rather than a deep inner reflection about what is actually going on in there. Yeah.
That's part of it. And second issue is that it's done so prematurely, with the intention to get to a comfortable place. That if I make myself uncomfortable myself, then that's somewhat more comfortable than really allow myself to go through with my client or with the other, whatever we make together. Because yes, so I think I would encourage people. That sounds slightly guru type. Apologies. It sounds like that. I don't have intention to say. Any mechanical use of intervention of any kind that you have read or heard other people using, please don't use it as a mechanical intervention. Let yourself have an embodied experience of that privileged position and then own it. You know, and I think people don't allow themselves to go through that process. They leave that process for client to travel, but remain somewhat very distant.
It's like almost feeling like that underneath it all, the therapist kind of knows this is where I need to get to. I need to acknowledge I'm in a position of power and privilege. Therefore, I'll acknowledge that, but have not gone through the lived experience of feeling what that is actually like to be in a position of power. How does that feel for my client? How do I feel about that? And that is new for each client, isn't it? Because it will be different for each person that you sit in front of. So to assume and to make that statement, but actually what does it realistically feel like in that relationship with somebody else is a different thing.
It is, yeah. And how abusive it is, Peter, that if I am as a client, as an agent person, sitting with somebody who's white therapist, and we start this discussion about differences, and really in 2 minutes into the discussion, the therapist says, "Oh, I'm very aware of my privileged position as a white person." I'm not really sure whether they're trying to tell me with this, that they have already assumed that I don't have a privileged position. So that premature moving away from the client is what the real problem is.
No, I get that. And again, I suppose with lots of things in therapy, it is about that deeper self-reflection and exploration of understanding what is going on, well, both within that process, but also within yourself as a therapist.
It is, yeah. I have to say, I'm going to say something controversial here, and many people, will not like this saying this, but that's fine. I think some therapists still kind of follow the kind of traditions of this absolute nonsense concept of blank screen, and the idea that I can carry this blank screen in the service of either projection and so transference and counter-transference and other things. That's absolute. I mean, what could be more abusive than that, really, I guess, that it has nothing to do with me, my clients projected on me, or my clients projected into me as a projective identification. I mean, what could be more abusive, I guess, in that position to hold that position that I'm absolute neutral entity, and whatever's happening, what are you not comfortable with, or your anger, or is everything to do with you. I mean, I think I'm really glad that relational psychoanalysts, they have really moved away from that thinking, but you still see those ripple effects in our field. But the thing is, it's not just about that one modality. It spreads to other modalities too, that kind of thinking, the idea of bracketing off, or not really understanding about the self-disclosure in that way. If we believe, I'm changing the topic, Peter. Many therapist counselors in this country, they fundamentally would say something that, for me, the therapeutic relationship is the heart, is the key of the work. And I think they say this, keeping the dualistic, the individualistic philosophy intact, instead of truly believing in the relational encounter between me and client. The therapy is, if it's truly relational encounter, then it's not just the journey of client, it's the journey of therapist too. And it's the meeting of those two people to complete a unique encounter, and both not fully aware that what might happen when they meet. That's what the therapy is. That's what the counseling is. Not trying to sit here and imagine that I know what might be going on for you, kind of an attempt. Some of the very fundamental concepts of our work they are based on this dualistic thinking that I am separate from you, I'm therapist, you're client, and they use the tagline of relationship-based work, but they're not really truly committing to the true relational work. Do I sound really grumpy there, Peter?
No, not at all. I think you sound very clear, and I think it's making me think deeper about how we connect with the other person in the therapeutic relationship, and that bringing your full self in there as the client does, and how those two people interconnect and meet within that encounter. But no, I don't think you sounded grumpy at all. Thinking about connection and connecting with others, how much do you feel connected to the wider therapist community? Do you feel connected to the wider therapist community?
Hard to be both understand the word wider, really. I mean, you are much more famous than I am, Peter, so I guess your wider is really wider to somebody like myself, who's most of the time rather introvert, or moving between pretending extrovert and remaining introvert. I think I've done some work with BACP, attended a conference here and there, and I done some attended some conferences with BPS and other stuff. So I have some contact with people in that sense. I think I really think there is a need of more work, and I really honestly believe, Peter, what you have started, the Therapist Connect movement, and it had to start the way you started, because if you had planned something really grand as an organization, it wouldn't have worked. It had to be this natural, organic processing that, a tweet, at the start of this year. It was really, that's what was needed, that people engage in that. People engage in a meaningful way. People have discussions about the politics of our profession. People talk about different topics. People find a way to support each other's practice, and people find a way to reach out for support. And I really think that the work that you started, I think there's a great potential in that. Personally, because being in a teaching environment, being linked with attending some conferences and stuff, there is some contact with other people, and I move. I think sometimes I wish if I have more contacts, especially if I'm looking for some support. Wow, it'd be really good to reach out, and not thinking who could I reach out, and other times, feel satisfied. So I think kind of moved between different polarities.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, I consider myself an introvert as well. So it's very strange kind of feeling so out there and connected to so many therapists over these last 6 months, because I think naturally that's not something that I would have kind of lent into and done. So it's been a bit of a journey for me as well, really. One of the things that then kind of coming to the end of this discussion, I was wondering kind of what is next for you, kind of what have you got planned over the next 12 months or whatever. Is that obviously you're going to continue teaching, but is there anything else that you've got within the therapist community that you're planning and interested in at the moment?
Yeah, I think the two things that stands out for me, I'm really, as I said early on, I'm very expressive about my love and passion for groups. I want to be doing some CPD group training for practitioners. I haven't finalized the details, of course, because of the COVID-19 situation, and I guess it's probably be later in this year or next year, hopefully. So that's the one thing, and the second thing is that I think I'm quite interested in finding a way where perhaps maybe reaching out to somebody like yourself, Peter, that how that platform of Therapists Connect can create a platform where therapists, counselors can engage in a kind of more, at some more deeper level with the contemporary issues, and being part of that. So I see some kind of interest in that and engaging in that part.
And I think I think what you're saying, I think there is a real appetite out there at the moment for something like that, in terms of, therapists getting together and really talking through and working on some of the predominant issues that are facing the profession, but from as many different voices and backgrounds and approaches that we possibly can. And it almost feels like, not being from an organisation, but actually being a collective kind of unity and a response to the issues that the profession's facing. And there's a lot of voices out there, I think, doing that, but I think trying to bring them together, I think, is going to be really important over the next few years. I do believe that as well.
It is, but that carries a risk of the number of voices, because that has been the history of counselling psychotherapy profession in this country. If you look at the last 40 years, even longer, it has been very difficult, I guess, for counselling psychotherapy profession in this country to come to some common agreement. There is something about this that needs some exploration and some work. And it kind of, there's a disservice to that, to the profession, I guess, and professionals, because the division just happens at a very interesting point in my experience. If you look at the history of the last 20, 30 years, and where there is an absolute great benefit of having a different opinion. But one of the things I have noticed that those conflicts, those differences, they grow so massive that it almost kind of, people kind of break away from each other. And where the conflict can be really healthy in a democratic debate, until the point that somebody says that I'm no longer part of this group. And that has huge trauma for a group. And I think if you look at the history of counselling psychotherapy here in this country, really, if last 70, 80 years, in a very subtle ways, the profession has gone through that process of several traumas. And where, because it's so complex at some level, because when the new voice emerges, it's exciting, it's lovely, it's a new birth. There's a lot of people around that voice who would, want to make that sort of work, and all the attention goes for that survival until that group grows and to big enough. And when there is a conflict, instead of using that conflict effectively, it creates another group. Yeah. And I'm not surprised that the real issue, Peter, if you look at that, why is it? And I feel very strongly that counselling psychotherapy remains a voluntary profession. I know many colleagues, and I'm sure you're aware of them, and I have a lot of respect for them. They're working so hard, challenging, the status quo, and really fighting for the rights of counsellors and therapists. I think it's brilliant what they're doing. Why are we in this profession? Why are we in this situation in the first place? I think it needs some, because it does suit the wider system, or those forces who want counselling or psychotherapy remain a largely a voluntary profession. It does suit them, because the solution isn't just about that. The profession has to be regulated. Where I have spoken about this before, that I think some kind of regulation is ultimately what needs to happen. But it's not just about the regulation or not regulation. I don't think scope or pro or anti-scope is an answer to that debate. It's a much more bigger issue. Part of the problem is that that I think as a profession we have not been successful in making that transition from where we could work with other stakeholders, where we work with commissioners in a way that, and that doesn't mean that we follow commissioners' instructions. No other profession does it. We don't need to do that. We absolutely don't need to doubt our potential or our abilities. Absolutely. yes, I think the part of the problem isn't a medical model. The part of the problem isn't about pro or anti regulations or scope or similar kind of issues. The part of the problem is that I think we need that firmness we need to believe in ourselves. I think many people do that. I think that transition needs to happen, and we need to go with boldness, with clarity, and absolute no fluffiness, I would say. And what happens? Sorry, last comment I would say that before we move on. What happens in our field is that when there is a one voice try to engage with people about something, there is a counter voice of that, and that really doesn't help this whole argument, because I think there are many issues as a profession we need to solve, deal with or address. Sorry, Ray, I'm I think talking too much. That's probably the part two or some of the time.
No, I really appreciate the point you're making, because I think the issues are so complex, and I think what I almost feel like for me sometimes that we are arguing amongst ourselves. And then I think this might be part of the point that you were making, whereas actually, if we were collective and we had a bit more of a solid and collective view, there's actually some of the things we're fighting as a system, and we need to be more engaged with that and more influential in the decisions that are being made around that system, rather than fighting amongst ourselves over some of the aspects of that system. But that is it's a massive challenge, isn't it? And I think you're right. As soon as we get voices that develop within the profession, views develop and alternate views and agendas develop, and I think that is a big difficulty with how do we collectively bring everybody together to try and speak with one voice in a system that is challenging enough as it is.
Yeah, and I have to say, Peter, I'm very optimistic because I worked, as I said, nearly 10, 15 years running commission services. My services were commissioned by local authorities or by NHS. Being part of tendering and being part of those contracts, and I believe that there's enough appetite there among commissioners. I think that people have much more knowledge about counselling and psychotherapy. I mean, I have to say this is the biggest failure of our profession. That when nearly about 10 years now, that IAP introduction, that counselling or psychotherapy was sidelined. I think how on earth we ended up in that situation. The reality of that is that they had to train, thousands of workforce, and those people, some of them, they came from all sort of different backgrounds, and they had to invest millions of pounds to train them. I mean, this is the biggest scandal, I guess, of our profession, that there is a very well-trained workforce sitting there, who could have offered much more greater pool of interventions, than what they were going to train. And they sideline all of that and introduce, something completely new. And we all know the effectiveness of IAP services. I think this is the biggest scandal. And I have to say, Peter, part of the problem is that some of our colleagues, as soon as you hear the word NHS or medical model or working with commissioners, they don't want to go along. They don't want to sit on a table and engage in that debate. And if you are seen as somebody who is not somebody who's serious to sit on a table and engage in a plan of service delivery, people are not going to take you on board. I mean,
as we've talked about, there is such a massive amount of qualified therapists, counsellors and psychotherapists out there who are actively looking for work and want work. And my argument always is the need is out there, okay? The profile of mental health, mental well-being is probably at a peak right now, and people are wanting to access therapists, but actually the roles and the jobs out there do not represent the needs that is out there in the wider community. So yeah, no, I completely understand the point you're making there. Okay, well, I think we've kind of come to the end, really. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we finished? Or I think we've covered a lot of issues in that discussion. I think.
No, I just want to say thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much for thinking about me, for approaching me. Yes, I'd like to, stay engaged, Peter, with you. I think, as I was saying, that it's a great platform, Therapist Connect, because it's not linked with any one brand. It has a potential to really think we're talking about or bringing people together, in a meaningful way. And thank you, and have a good summer if I don't see or speak to you before then.
Oh, thank you very much. And I do hope at some point we will actually meet face to face one day when we return back to
that'd be really nice.
That'd be fantastic. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Therapist Connect podcast. Go to www.therapist-connect.com for more discussions and debates.